So yeah, Great Designer Search 3, challenge number 3. Last time I did this with some preparation, I'd already read everything. This time I'm going to do this live. Challenge was to create a mechanic. Each contestant was tasked with creating a new keyworded mechanic and then creating 8 cards. And I'm just going to say straight up, making mechanics is really freaking hard. Like, coming up with a concept that does something useful at common for limited, but also interesting at rare or constructed, has enough space to fit on lots of cards while still making sense and being simple enough as a concept to fit into a keyword and get kind of a flavorful name. Like, this is really hard. Making keywords is really hard. So we're down to 6 contestants. So Ari, let's see what you did here. So we've got a mechanic called Revered, and Revered N means as card name enters the battlefield, you may tap up to N other untapped creatures you control. And then card name enters the battlefield with a number of +1/+1 counters equal to the number of creatures tapped in this way. A Convoke-ish type thing that lets you get counters for those tapped creatures, but you've got a limit. I'm guessing more like Revered 1 and 2 at common and maybe big numbers at uncommon and rare. It's one of those things that you're going to want to always do. Like, why would you ever cast a creature that had this option and not take it if you could? Tapping an untapped creature isn't that very high of a cost. It means you aren't attacking or blocking, but presumably this means you're putting a creature that's larger into play, which means you've got a better attacker or blocker for next turn. So design number 1, Sacred Crane. As a common, it's 3 and a W for a bird spirit. It's a 2/2 with flying, and it has Revered 1. So you are either casting this as a 4-mana 2/2 flyer, which is severely underpowered, or you're casting this as a 4-mana 3/3 with flying and tapping a creature, which is honestly not even that amazing. Like, the best thing to compare this to right now is a 3W 3/2 flyer, which is a pretty common card we put in sets. And that card is good. It's totally playable, doesn't get you super excited, which is fine. We're talking about a common here. But I guess my point is saying, like, you've got this mechanic where when you don't hit the mechanic, you've got a severely underpowered card, and when you do hit the mechanic, you've just barely done better than, like, a normal draft card. I'm sure there's more design space here. I'm sure they've done a lot more stuff with it, and this is a common. So let's just move on. Design number 2, Ghostly Carp, another common, 4 UU, creature, fish spirit. It's a 5/5 with Revered 1, and it can't attack unless it has a +1/+1 counter on it. So the low end of this is a 6-mana 5/5 with Defender, which is pretty bad. Blue typically has a card kind of like that, but it's not something you're really super excited to play. High end is 6-mana 6/6 that can attack, which is pretty bonkers for blue, actually. It's like the opposite. So blue usually has these serpents that they start out as an expensive wall, and then later in the game, when you've turned them on, they can start attacking. The problem with this is you can't do that. It's already in play, and it's either attacking from day 1 because you had another creature, and why wouldn't you ever turn it on, or it's not, and then you can't ever catch up. The only thing that makes this card interesting to me is if the set also has a +1/+1 counter theme, so you can get a counter onto this later. Otherwise, you're just going to hold on to it until you can kick it. It's not a very high cost to kick, and then it's a 6/6. Done. That doesn't even really feel like a blue card at that point. Like, casting 6-mana 6/6 is green's territory, and blue really only gets to infringe on that by having these sorts of can't attack mechanics, but this is never going to be turned off. If it's turned off, you're not casting it. Even though it's technically blue, I just don't like where that's going. Or Kami. Oh, the Kami are back. It's Kamigawa. Here we go. It's a spirit, of course it is. I missed that. Everything here is a spirit, apparently, so that's pretty cool. They're all revered spirits. I like the flavor. At least there's something cool there. 2 GG, creature, boar spirit, 3/3, Revered 1, so again, the on-or-off version. When card name enters the battlefield, if a creature revered it, you gain 4 life. So I'm starting to see a pattern here, and I don't like where that pattern is going. And so far, the pattern is, if you don't revere it, you've got a card that is barely playable. I chose not to revere you. I don't believe in you. And the spirit's like, frack you. I'm not going to fight for you. You needed to worship me, man. Can't you have faith? You do revere it, you get bonuses. And then in this case and the last case, you get more bonuses. And so we're just piling on the bonuses for the mechanic, which it's kind of like kicker. And that's fine. Like, you can obviously have a mechanic where you have an A and a B. But the problem is that the cost of the bonus here is so low, and the downside of not paying it is so high that we're going to have to watch out for this being balanced. I think 4-mana 3/3 is borderline playable again. It's not quite as bad as 4-mana 2/2 flyer. Like, when you play that, you're like, oh, I really didn't want to do that. Usually this 4-mana 3/3, at least, like, if you have to play it on turn 4 with no other creatures, you're like, great, I can trade with this. But upside is so good. Like 4 life and a 4/4 for 4 mana is such a huge difference from a 4 mana 3/3. You know, the biggest downside of tapping a creature is, well, there's 2 downsides. You didn't attack with it and you didn't block with it. Gaining 4 life undoes the I didn't block with it, and a bigger creature, which is inherent to Revered, undoes the I didn't attack with it because you'll just catch up on later turns. It's kind of like when you don't attack with your Llanowar Elves on turn 2, you cast a 3-drop instead of a 2-drop. That's way better. And this Revered is kind of like Convoke in that it's making your creatures cheaper by tapping other creatures. Like, mana curve-wise, usually +1 to mana equals +1 to power and toughness, so this is kind of just a weird Convoke. So I've got Ari here. They are saying that they think the big problem was that they overestimated the cost of tapping a creature, which is really quite small compared to a +1/+1 counter, which, yeah, I think is where we're going with this. A lot of the time tapping a creature, especially for a limited mechanic, which at common and uncommon this is, finding an opportunity to tap a creature is not that hard. Presumably, this mechanic might be really interesting in a Zendikar-like environment where tapping a creature is a really high cost because you should be attacking or blocking or you're losing. That would again go back to seeing a 1 or a 2 mana or even a 3 mana card to kind of show us what was going on with that. So I guess what I'd be looking for at this point, if I saw this as a designer in a set that I was designing, I'd be desperately looking for a way for you to convince me that you can make a card where I ever feel good about not using the Revered portion. You know, I was kind of looking for like the 2 mana 2/2, like something where you're like, I will just play this on turn 2 because I need to get my chain of creatures going. So far, everything's 4 mana or greater, and so by the time you hit that turn, the Revered has to be worth it, because when you're casting things on turn 2, like, you can tempo. You can be like, I have a 2 mana 2/2, and I know I could have casted it as a 5 mana 5/5, good old Kavu Titan, but by casting it on turn 2, I'm staying on curve, I'm spending my mana, I'm getting in. But that's never going to happen with a 4 mana creature. So let's look for something cheap. That's the other thing I'm looking for, a cheap card. Nope, Allison, you're not going to find something that breaks the pattern. Design number 4, Corroded Toad. 4 mana black creature. It's a frog spirit. It's a 2/4. Revered 1, and it has an activated ability, black, and remove a +1/+1 counter to give target creature -2/-2 until end of turn. Okay, so we're starting to get into some slightly more complicated design space here. So when you revere it, it's a 4 mana 3/5, which is pretty good. And then you can pump it back down to a 2/4 to kill something small. Unfortunately, this is also going to be super mathy because it's an instant speed ability, it's really cheap to use, and it's an ability that changes the size of at least 2 creatures. So I can imagine a scenario where I'm attacking or blocking with this guy, maybe I'm attacking or blocking with another guy, my opponent puts a couple creatures in front of my creatures, and then I make my creature smaller to make your creature smaller, and suddenly combat's completely different, and hopefully you got to predict all of that and you didn't get blown out by this onboard trick, because nobody likes that. But more than likely, one of us got completely confused by the numbers changing. I'm not even sure I could keep track of this. This is a lot going on here. So that's just really kind of scary. I'm surprised this wasn't a sorcery speed ability, or maybe when it dies, do the thing. Lots of ways to clean that up. But again, the ability rewards revering, and like, we're just getting bigger and bigger upside. I'm getting a little bit worried here because we're going from cards where like it's kind of vaguely acceptable to play it without revered to cards where like if you play it without revered, it's because you're desperate and you wish you didn't have to, and that's never good. You don't want a mechanic where basically you just never feel good about not using that mechanic, because then why'd you give the player a choice? You're just giving people bad times here. Mushroom Kami, 4G for a 3/3. It's got Revered 2, so now I've got a bigger number finally. So you can make it a 3/3 or a 4/4 or a 5/5. And then when card name enters the battlefield, you create a 1/1 green sapperling creature token for each creature that revered it. I like how this combos with itself, I guess, where I tap some creatures, I cast this guy, it gives me more creatures, those creatures are now there to revere the next creature I cast next turn. It's kind of like this snowballing effect. I like that. I would expect that to exist if this mechanic existed. I'm just definitely never casting this as just a 5 mana 3/3. This is the first card that there's just no scenario where I'm doing that. I will only do that if it's literally to prevent myself from dying the next turn, because otherwise, there's no reason not to, because it's going to create way more value than what I had to tap to get it anyways. And even Revered 1 feels bad. Like, how's that for a bad situation? You have, like, the 1 creature, and then now you need 2, and you're like, oh, I guess I'll wait for 1 more creature, and then you die holding this guy in your hand when a 4/4 and a 1/1 would have been enough. Wow, that tension doesn't seem like it'd be fun. I feel like we would play this mechanic, and we'd enjoy the moments you got to do it, because doing the thing's always fun, and we'd look for a way to make it so that doing the thing wasn't always required, and I haven't seen that yet. It's interesting that we have two different ways now of caring about whether you're revered. 3 of the cards cared about +1/+1 counters, but this one cared about something different. That just needs to be cleaned up. There's no reason not to line those up. Rising Sword Divinity, 3 WW for an Angel Spirit. It's a 2/2 flyer. Revered 2, so if I revere him, at best he's a 5 mana 4/4 flying, and then he's got an ability. When card name deals combat damage to a player, you may move card name's +1/+1 counters onto target creature. If you do, exile card name, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. So you have to move whatever number of counters it has. I have 1 counter on it, I move 1 counter. If I have 2 counters, I have 2 counters. If I have infinite counters, I move infinite counters. Hopefully I still have the creatures to revere it again, because that's what I'm going to want to do. But even if I don't, I've probably already gotten enough value out of it. 5 mana for a 4/4 flyer that lets me move the counters, and then maybe get some more counters, and maybe just keep distributing +1/+1 counters. Okay, so that's pretty fiddly. This shows me that they were thinking about the moving counters theme or the adding counters theme, so I can pick these counters and put them on my Serpent, which can now attack next turn, which is cool. I like that. It's interesting because I almost wanted to just say blink anything, and that's like a hidden trick, but obviously that makes this card way more powerful, and now it's got this weird hidden trick that is the thing you're supposed to do with it. It's good to have hidden tricks, but it's not usually good to have the hidden trick be the thing that you're supposed to do with the card all the time. That's me postulating, that's not what this card does. My main problem is we're just getting bigger and bigger rewards without having a card that's ever worth not revering. The more rare we get, the more distance we get, whereas everything depends on it being revered. I actually would have expected rares to be ones where, like, it's a 3 mana 3/4 vigilance by default, and revered is just gravy on top of that. So sometimes you cast it on turn 3 and construct it, and you cast the next one on turn 4 and get the extra bonus, and you're like, yeah, I did the thing. Awakener of Spring is a 5 mana creature. Oh boy, another 5 mana 2/2. Where are we going with this? 5 mana 2/2, 5 mana 2/2, 4 mana 2/2, 6 mana 1/1, 8 mana 0/0. Okay, we haven't seen that yet. It's a 2/2 with Revered 2, so it's a 5 mana 4/4, so this better have a really good ability. At the beginning of your end step, if card name has 2 or more counters on it, untap all creatures and lands you control. Jeez! Okay, so I definitely need to revere 2 this. I can't just revere 1 it, then get to untap the creatures I revered with, so they get to block anyways. And also the lands. This guy's free in almost every sense of the word. And then I get to use those lands to put more counters on him. He has the ability 2G, put a +1/+1 counter on card name. Wow, so I can cast this without revering it, and I can use the ability to add more counters and get up to this bonus. So I guess I can cast this for 8 mana and tap 1 creature, or cast it for 11 mana. Wow, and still get kind of like the same effect. The more I think about it, the more I like this card. It's the first one with sort of an out. I don't have creatures, so I have a different thing. So it's almost like it has hybrid revered. It's like revere 1/2G, 1/2G. Oh, that mana symbol would look funny. I like that the designer thought to put an out on one of these cards. It shows that they were thinking about that. I'm a little bit sad that this is the first time we've seen it on a rare. This is kind of the first card that gives a nod towards, like, sometimes you're going to want to cast this without revering it, and we're going to give you a reason why that's actually okay, and you should not feel terrible when you do this. So I like this. I like this card. This is probably my favorite of the bunch overall. It almost feels mythic, honestly. I would totally expect to see a card in this space, mostly because it's unique so far. None of the other cards do anything like that. Oh, design number 8, 3 Face of Eternal Stone. Mythic rare. So we've got our mythic. This is exciting. 3 WBG for a legendary creature, a god spirit. Isn't that, like, redundant? God spirit? Or do you, like, need to add Sun in here so he can be the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit all at once? Because you've only got 2 of those. Legendary creature, 2/3 of the Trinity, 5/5, revered 3. I'm surprised at Mythic Rare we didn't see, like, revered X or something like that. Vigilance, Reach, Menace, so that's pretty cool. He's got 3 colors, revered 3, 3 keywords. I like that. That's balanced from an elegant design standpoint. 1 comma, remove a +1/+1 counter from card name. Card name gains indestructible until end of turn. That actually kind of, for me, breaks the elegance. I was really excited about the 3 abilities, and then I find that there's this pseudo 4th ability, and it's just a keyword hiding here. I would have expected something a little bit different so it didn't break that elegance in my mind. But I think what I'm most disappointed with is it's just a stat monster, which at Mythic Rare is not that exciting. I usually like my Mythic Rares to do something crazy and bombastic. Enters the battlefield and boom, something explodes, or cast a bunch of free spells, or make 5 tokens, or something like really cool, and he just enters play as an 8/8, which is cool. 8/8's big. This kind of taking the Achroma approach homage to Mythic Rare design, which happens. It's fine that that happens, but it's not really that unique or distinct. I would have expected this as a rare submission and then something really cool at Mythic Rare that kind of showed something that only Revered can do, which is what we see here. So both rares kind of did this really cool thing with the counters, showed me some unique design space, whereas Three Face just kind of uses it for another keyword. Overall, this is an ability that I would definitely try a second pass on. So that's usually how things work out in set design is you come up with a bunch of mechanics, you pick one or two, you stick them in a set, you try them out, and you walk away from the playtest and you're like, okay, well, how did that feel? And a lot of times you're like, this is garbage, let's just get rid of it. Occasionally you're like, this is obviously what the set needs, we just need to iterate on it. I suspect I'd walk away from this saying, you know, when I do the thing, it's fun, but that's like half the coin. Can we make the other half of the coin interesting? Convoke, for example, you're fine if you don't use it. You just tap some lands instead of creatures. So there's that dichotomy's built into it, and this doesn't have that. You would say, go do some hole filling, and I need you to only give me designs where not revering the creature is at least 50% of the time the right choice. So 1-drops and 2-drops, or cards that actually get worse if you revere them in some way, like Unleash. You get a counter, but it becomes unable to block. Or maybe things like Skulk, where bigger the creature it is, the easier it is to block. Things like that. So I think it's a great seed of an idea. Doesn't quite get there for me. Let's move on to Chris Mooney. I'm not going to read the notes. The mechanic should be able to stand on itself. If I can't understand it from the context of the cards, that's a failure. So design 1. Rusty Rogue, it's a common. 1 and a black for a human rogue. It's a 1/1 with the Death Touch and Backstab 1. And what that means is, this creature gets +1/+0 as long as you control 1 or more unblocked attackers. It's not saying this creature needs to be unblocked. It's saying any of my creatures. So if I attack with 3 creatures and any single one of those creatures is unblocked, all of my backstabs turn on. Instinctively, I'm a little bit worried about the complexity of combat with that, but it might be okay. Certainly if I'm attacking with 3 creatures and you only have 2 blockers, it's easy. We all know backstabs on, that was easy. But if I'm attacking with 3 creatures and you have 4 blockers, but not all the blocks are good, now we both have to do the math, me before I attack and you after I attack, of like, what combination of blocks is correct? If I do this chump over here, does that make this block over here better? Or am I chumping mostly just because I don't want to take the extra damage from the backstab? It's very interesting because you can't just assume the creatures that are blocked don't trigger and the creatures that are not blocked do trigger, which is usually how these Saboteur-like abilities work. So this is playing in a completely different space. So that's good and bad. The good is that I have no idea how it would play. That's a good sign to me. I like reading mechanics and going, I don't know how that would play, I have to try it. A lot of mechanics like that get dumped, but it's a good sign that it's playing in a space that I don't have an answer for, because those are the mechanics that are most likely able to produce new gameplay patterns and new thought patterns, and that's really you're aiming for with a new mechanic. You want that new mechanic to not just be a repeat of existing mechanics with a new coat of paint on it, or slight tweak on an existing mechanic where I can look at it and go, I know how much that's worth. That's worth 1 mana. You want a mechanic that says, that sounds like a fun thing, but I don't know how that's going to play. I don't know what cards are going to be good with that. I need to experiment. I need to play test. I need to play Magic, and Magic's fun, so I want a mechanic that makes me want to play Magic. I don't want a mechanic that lets me sit back as a designer spike person and go, oh, that must be terrible. I'm going to say that's terrible. I'm never going to play that card. People do that anyways. Obviously, we have Magic fans who are more than happy to tell the world how every card is terrible or every card is amazing before they've played it. But the best mechanics don't trigger that in better players. So, Big F Monster asks, this is what you want in a designer, right? To make mechanics that are not like to any others. It's an interesting question, because I think you want, every block, I guess, set now usually gets a couple new mechanics, and I think you want one of your mechanics to at least feel not like any other mechanic you've ever seen before. Like, Magic has a lot of pieces to it, but we've explored a lot of space, so you can't just avoid mechanics completely. It's very difficult to do. But you want to find a way to mix the existing elements in a way where a player looks at it and doesn't immediately know how that mechanic's going to play. And then conversely, when they do play with it, they're like, oh, that felt different. That was a new experience. Yes, it still used +1/+1 counters or color changing or whatever in a way, we've done that before, but the experience as a whole felt different. Your other mechanics can be a little bit more derivative, like your cyclers and your kickers and those kind of things. Those are fine. You're going to have workhorse mechanics. I think that's almost the holy grail of Magic design, is coming up with mechanics that read and feel and play differently but are still elegant. That's what I like about this mechanic. The thing I don't like about it is I'm worried it might be a little bit mathy and complicated to figure out. So now that we've talked about the mechanic, let's start looking at the cards. 1B, creature, 1/1, Death Touch, Backstab 1. So if Backstab isn't triggered, This creature's definitely blocked, and it's definitely trading. That's what Death Touch does. Any situation where Backstab does trigger, I'm either getting through for 2, or I'm blocked and I'm trading anyways. So kind of a bad first example, because this should just be a 2-1. If it's unblocked, it's always going to be a 2-1, and if it's blocked, it's always going to trade, and it doesn't matter what its power is. There's some, corner cases, and it's okay for there to be corner cases that enable interesting edge cases of gameplay when those are invisible, when those are things that naturally flow out of words you're putting on the card for other reasons, or words that are interesting for other reasons. But Backstab here does nothing under any normal gameplay scenario where you're playing with cards like this, aka limited. Stunning Spy, another common. It's a 2 blue human rogue. Big surprise, rogues have Backstab. I bet no one saw that coming. 1/3, Backstab 1. Whenever card name deals combat damage to a creature, tap that creature. It doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. This one is a little bit better than the Death Touch example in that whether it's a 1/3 or a 2/3 when it's blocked is actually relevant. Tapping the creature and not tapping is obviously a big deal, but it's not the same as killing it. It's trying to do the same space that the other one was doing, where there's a thing that happens if you don't block it and a thing that happens when you do block it. I do like that the commons are playing in that sort of threshold 1 space of Backstab, where they're doing interesting things, they're trying to cause interesting decisions, even if they're the only creature with Backstab, or frankly the only creature at all. That's good, that's what commons should be doing. They shouldn't be relying on other cards to be interesting. I'm waiting to see what the interesting designs with bigger numbers are, because certainly at Backstab 1 we're not talking about huge differences. Pretty similar to Afflict. It's obviously a very different mechanic, but it's playing in that same space of punish you if you don't block, punish you if you do block. Yeah, I like this card. It's a little bit interesting because Backstab's a very aggressive ability, but this ability obviously works on defense. I think it's okay that some of your cards do that, but this one's pretty loud. I'm going to play this on 3 mana, and there's a good chance I'm playing a control deck and I just want to slow you down. It's definitely better than the Death Touch. I'm going to look at some more examples and kind of see how it plays out with larger numbers. And again, these cards are just way harder to evaluate because the mechanic, I don't know how it would play out. Previous rounds I could just say, oh, this is like this, and I've seen this before, and I just don't have that here. Stab Happy, Enchantment Aura for 1 red mana. Enchanted creature has First Strike and Backstab 2. Let's just say this was our enchanted creature has First Strike and +2/+0. Would I play that card? Probably, but I'm not like super excited by it. Auras that give big power boosts and are cheap tend to be very swingy. If you don't have an answer, I win the game way faster than I otherwise would, because auras are undercosted for their power value, and they have haste inherently because I can put them on a creature that's already in play. If I'm playing cheap auras and my creatures are living, I am winning the race. But if I play cheap auras and my creatures die, I am absolutely losing the race. So playing an aura is kind of like betting on my ability to keep that creature around and out-tempo you. It's obviously worse than simply giving it First Strike and +2/+0. How much worse is that? Yeah, this is actually way worse. This is not going to work out well. Whenever you've got continuous effects that give power boosts, you always have to watch out in combat for whether or not the opponent can turn it off as a surprise. Especially on things like commons, we explicitly look out for designs where the power and toughness boost can randomly be turned off in the middle of combat as a surprise, because that sort of ambush is not usually a good experience. Like, it feels good if it's a tricky thing that your opponent gets to do once in a while. You feel real smart, but most of the time it's just a feel-bad experience for the player doing the thing, and it's not the gameplay we're looking for with those kinds of things. We don't want my 3/3 in the middle of combat to just randomly be a 1/1 because you happen to have a removal spell. And the reason that is because instant speed tricks are already designed for combat. If I have a lightning bolt or a giant growth, I'm already doing things in combat where I get to one-up you and surprise you. And we don't want those tricks and removal spells to suddenly just be way more of a blowout because you're playing this set's mechanic. Just not what we're looking for. If I have a flyer and this card on a non-flyer, and I'm thinking, oh, my flyer's going to get through, so Backstab's turned on, so it's a safe attack. Let's attack. And you're like, bolt your flyer, and I'm like, well, not only is my flyer gone, but now you can safely block, and I'm going to lose my guy. And I'm going to lose my aura, and you just 3-for-1 me with a lightning bolt. That's super exciting. Yeah, I would never want to play this card on purpose. I would be very sad to put this in a deck as a more experienced drafter, and I think the less experienced drafters would probably enjoy this card. I would be okay with this card existing, but it's not a card you want to do very many of. This is like your one bad card in red, for example. Backstab has a lot of depth and complexity on this card, and I actually like that. This is Oddly enough, the worst card from a strategic perspective has the most interesting complexity to me so far. So I kind of like what this card tells me Backstab can do. I don't necessarily know if I like the card itself, but I like what it tells me. Vampiric Rogue, uncommon, 2BB for a creature. It's a 1/2 flying lifelink creature with Backstab 2. So I have a 4 mana 3/2 flying lifelink, which is pretty bonkers for limited. Often one of my highest draft picks is going to be the 3 mana 2/2 lifelink flyer or 4 mana 2/2 lifelink flyer in black, and this vampire is an extra point of power, which is huge swings. That's 6 points of life swing a turn. That's a race that my opponent is not winning. So this card is pretty powerful, and I'm a little bit worried that I'm going to like it just because it's powerful. Going back to a comment from last week, is a card still interesting if you add 1 mana to it, and if not, maybe you've just made a rate monster? It feels like it might be in that perspective, but sometimes that happens for the cheaper, more normal cards. How often is Backstab not going to be turned on? Well, if my opponent has a flyer or a reach creature, then I have a 4 mana 1/2 flying lifelink, and it's just going to sit there and do nothing because there's no way I'm attacking with it. But that's not actually that different than if it was just a raw 3/2 flying lifelink, because I promise I'm not trading my 3/2 flying lifelink for anything. This is not that exciting of a use of the mechanic. This is the kind of card I would expect to be made, don't get me wrong. It's a very workhorse design. It uses the mechanic in a way where the mechanic is actually really easy to understand because you just do the math really quickly and you say, is this on or is it not on? Okay, I did the thing. But it doesn't show off the uniqueness of the mechanic. I give it a B as a design. This card would exist, but this card doesn't tell me that you can make interesting cards with Backstab. So design 5, Skulking Stabist. I don't know where you sign up to be a Stabist, but I am going to get my resume ready. I'm going to be an A+ Stabist in the future. Skulking Stabist, a 4 mana human rogue. It's a 2/3 with Backstab 1. Creatures you control can't be blocked by creatures that have greater power. I don't know what that's supposed to do. I'm assuming that it does what the rules say it would do. Because I don't understand how else I would interpret this card, but this is a confusing card. You've successfully come up with an uncommon that baffles me, and that's not where you want your uncommons to be. Because this makes me like, if I'm a kind of player who thinks you block things sequentially, then I'm going to be like, well, if I block this first, then I have to block this first. But that's not how Magic works, because the creatures get bigger if something isn't blocked, but then they're already blocked by then. So what is that? I don't even know what that means. I don't know how that works with back. I literally don't know how that's supposed to work. I don't know how that's intended to work. Right. So yeah, the intention, as a commenter is pointing out, is that your creatures are hard to block, so therefore they get through, and then naturally that turns on Backstab, which makes sense. I get it. This is a place where I'd be looking to find a way to do that in a way that the wording made more sense and wasn't confusing. Some other way of wording it so that it says, your creatures are hard to block. And then that just makes sense. I would expect to see something like that. I would expect the set with Backstab to have ways to make your creatures harder to block. In fact, the only real downside to that is Backstab kind of inherently makes creatures harder to block because creatures with bigger power are harder to block. You're less likely to want to block a creature that's bigger. And if my creature has Backstab, then you have to at least think maybe it's going to be bigger because my other creature might get unblocked, and that's the whole point of the mechanic. I almost feel like in a set with Backstab, I wouldn't expect to see Backstab and unblockability kind of referenced on the same card. I would expect a card that was just like, I'm a 1/1 unblockable, and that card goes in the Backstab deck because it just turns on your Backstab. On a design test, they couldn't make cards without the mechanic, so I'm going to give that a pass. I don't really like this card, but I agree it represents something that would need to be in the set. Card Sharp. It's a rare, costs 3 mana, 1 blue. It's a creature human rogue. It's a 1/1, has Backstab 2, so it's either a 1/1 or a 3/1. Whenever card name becomes blocked, draw cards equal to its power. So there's kind of 3 modes to this card. I'm either hitting my opponent for 3, or I'm blocked and hitting a creature for 1 and drawing 1 card, or hitting a creature for 3 and drawing 3 cards. Even in the worst case scenario where my Backstab doesn't get through and my opponent tricked me and blocked all my creatures and blocked my 1/1, I still get to draw 1 card, which is pretty cool. And when this works out, I get to draw 3 cards, which is insane. I like that it's got 1 toughness. That's the appropriate toughness because I shouldn't be able to draw 3 cards multiple times. That would just be crazy. I like we're playing in the power matters space that Eternalize played in, where a creature would come back as a larger creature and the thing would trigger and do a bigger thing, which was kind of cool. Keying off power is a place I would explore a lot of with Backstab. I wouldn't expect a lot of designs to make it. This is the kind of thing as a set designer where I would say, this is a cool card, go back to your desks and design 3 or 4 more cards in this space. Let's just explore designs that care about power because Backstab makes that interesting. That's another good thing that I like to see out of designers is seeds of ideas that can be turned into exploratory design. Startle Pest, rare, 1R, creature goblin rogue, 0/1, haste menace. Whenever card name attacks, creatures you control gain backstab 1 until end of turn. This has that problem of you do A to do B to do C. If this card was just creatures you control get +1/+0, I would know that. I could look at my attacks and I could think it out and go, if I attack with this, I know what happens. It's locked in. My decision leads to this outcome. Great. But this card explicitly forces me to say, if I do A, that allows B to happen, and then B might result in C. And so now I'm being forced to think multiple steps ahead, and that's something that, generally speaking, the card shouldn't force you to do. I know a lot of people say, well, Magic's a complicated game, and Magic is for smart people who want to make tough decisions and is strategic, and the complexity is important, and I agree with all that. But that complexity should be hidden from players who don't want to deal with it. That's almost literally what New World Order is about. And I think was a great step for the game, is taking complexity that is in-your-face complexity and removing it in favor of complexity that's kind of below the surface, complexity that you have to find, and you have to find the strategic patterns and the hard decisions. And it's actually, I think, made the game more strategic, because no longer are you winning games because your opponent just couldn't figure out how to make the pieces work together, or they just missed an onboard trick, but instead you're winning games by saying, you know, the cards don't say I can do this thing, but I figured out that if I do A plus B plus C over the next 3 turns, I'm going to sneak in 1 extra point of damage, and that's really cool. It's a long-winded way of saying I don't like cards like this where A causes B causes C, when I could have just said A causes C and just gotten straight to the point. And, I'm going through these extra mental steps. So that's mental processing that I don't want to do if I don't have to. But not only that, but it's A, then B, which maybe causes C, so now I have to do A, then B to C and D. And I have to do all of that before I can decide whether I want to attack with anything and what I want to attack with. And that's just a crazy amount of mind melting space. So I don't like what this card does. That being said, there's ways to fix that. I mean, both Haste and Menace make it more likely that I'm going to know up front that this is going to trigger because my opponent wasn't expecting it and or can't block it with 2 creatures. That helps a lot, although Haste makes my job harder because now I can just cast it and attack with it. I have to do all that math before I even cast my creatures for the turn. Before I even spend my mana for the turn, I have to think, if I cast this and I attack with it, can my opponent block it, and then will I get the reward I want? So now it's A, B, C, D, which is, at least it's a rare. You're probably playing it in a constructed deck where you have much more control over whether creatures get blocked. That makes it a lot less offensive. It's not like Signal Pest, which was an uncommon. On the whole, I don't like what this card makes me do, but I do want a card like this to exist if you're going to have Backstab. So we're on to the last one, Gang Leader, Mythic Rare. So it's 4 black for a creature, human rogue. It's a 3/3 with Menace. Other rogues you control have Menace. So we've got a little bit of rogue tribal going on. All the backstab creatures have been rogues, so I'm just going to make that assumption. And then it has backstab X, where X is the number of unblocked attackers you control. Wow. Okay, that's interesting math. Okay. When card name enters the battlefield, create 3 1/1 black rogue creature tokens. Those rogues don't have menace inherently, but they're going to have menace as long as this creature's on the table. They don't have backstab, but they help contribute to this creature's backstab. So, oh my god, so much math. I'm in some form or constructed here, most likely. My opponent's going to do a bolt, or they're going to block it with a 3-power creature that I wasn't able to get out of the way, or whatever, and the backstab didn't matter. This is the first thing where if my opponent does manage to block it, I'm just sad. There's no upside to that. It's not going to do the thing I want it to do. And that's, I may be getting just distracted by the backstab. It's definitely a rogue lord that makes rogues. I mean, that's cool. That's a great place for a deck to be. And it just has this little bonus with backstab. So I guess that's what's kind of rubbing me, is like this feels kind of uninspired and unappealing for the backstab portion of it. You've got this new mechanic you're trying to show off, and if it shows up on a mythic rare, that's your one shot. You get 1, maybe 2 instances of your awesome mechanic in the set showing up on the mythic, and you want your mythic to really sell that mechanic as, here's why you want to play that mechanic. Either this card by itself is super awesome and makes you love the mechanic, or you want to play this card in a deck full of this mechanic, and that's awesome. This does that, but it does it in a very kind of sideways way because all of your guys are rogues. That's the reason you play this in a backstab deck, is because all the backstab creatures are rogues. A little bit sideways for a mythic. Probably would be better as a rare because it's a tribal card. Tribal cards tend to be better at rare. Yeah, this card's growing on me, but it feels more like a rare than a mythic. Design 1, Cillian Physician. It's a common. It costs 1B. It's a vampire cleric. It's a 2/1. When Cillian Physician enters the battlefield, if you spilled blood this turn, ooh, that's evocative. I wonder what that means. I'm gonna guess that means that I dealt some damage. If you spilled blood this turn, gain 3 life. You spill blood whenever a player loses 3 or more life. Okay, that's not anywhere close to what I would have expected. So my first instinct when I read this comment, this is the first card I've ever seen with this mechanic. Why 3? What was special about 3? It feels oddly mechanical. Why 3? Why not any? Why not 2? Why not the most, or half, or 1.5? I don't know. Why mine? I can spill my own blood. That's cool. Like, that part makes sense. I like that. I like the open-endedness that I can spill my own blood. And the more I think about it, that kind of explains why it can't just be 1, because I'm just going to play this in a deck with pain lands and I'm going to spill my own blood every turn. So why not at least 2? 3 might work out, but it feels very mechanical and rulesy. The nice thing is I gain 3 life, which reinforces that number. So it's not just the flavor, but the wording reinforces the flavor. It says, if you spilled blood, and then it says that I spill blood whenever any player loses life. And it's not that I necessarily cause them to lose life. I'd be looking really hard to line those up one way or another, because that's going to be, it's both a flavor disconnect, and if this card saw print just like this, I guarantee a ton of players would be misreading it and spending the pre-release going, wait, what? That does that? Or, wait, no, that's not what that says, and they'd read the card and be like, what the frack? You don't want that to be what your mechanic does, though. You're going to have cards, I've done it, I do it all the time, where you've played it for ages and you go, what, that has reach? What do you mean that has reach? But you don't want your main mechanic to be, wait, I can spill blood? Oh wait, but I don't have to do it? You could spill your own blood and it counts for me? That doesn't make any sense. Why does it say if you spilled blood? You want the words to match the intuition of what the mechanic does. That's like super important. Words are important. Words have meanings. Use the words for what they mean, please. So when Cillian Physician enters the battlefield, if blood was spilled this turn, I'm going to rephrase it. If blood was spilled this turn, gain 3 life. So if a player loses 3 or more life, I get to gain 3 life. I like the flavor there. That's cool. It's a 2-mana 2/1, so I'm totally going to play it on turn 2. If nothing happens, that's fine. And if I draw it later in the game, most likely I'm going to get to gain 3 life, which is not a huge bonus, but a nice little tiny bonus. Yeah, this card's fine. I like this card a lot. I'm going to separate my feelings about the mechanic and the wording from the card itself. This card is perfect. I love this card. Nice and clean, does stuff early, does stuff late, shows the mechanic, explains the mechanic, fits in a deck that wants this mechanic, good and limited, hits all the notes I want a common to hit. So that's great. Big F Monster is talking about how a mechanic that makes you lose life reminds them of the fetch shock mana base in modern decks and the Death Shadow decks that deal a lot of damage. 2 life would be a more interesting point in a lot of ways, but 2 life is just a shock land, 3 life is a fetch and a shock land, so it's not that much worse. I wonder if there's any cards in here that go into a Death Shadow deck, but I promise Cillian Physician does not go into a Death Shadow deck. It does not. Share Pain, a common, 2 and a black for an instant. You may spill your own blood. To spill your own blood, lose 3 life. What? What? You may pay 3 life. Why not? What? So now it's an action and a thing that can be checked, but the thing that's checked is... What? What is going on here? But why is it only 3, but it's 3 or more? Oh my god. Now this is really calling out the your thing, and I don't know how to fix this in a way that also maintains my rewording from here, where I said, if a blood was spilled this turn, bonkers. I love the verbiage is amazing, and I love when mechanics just read like cool, fantastical sentences. You may spill your own blood. Target creature gets -X until end of turn, where X is the most life any player lost this turn. So for 3 mana, as a black instant, I can give a creature what is probably going to generally be -3, -3, or -4, -4, something like that. Sometimes I'm going to have to pay 3 life to turn that on, sometimes not. This card's a really good card in Limited. Literally, I could just be like, oh, you attacked me with this 4/4? Okay, well, I took 4 damage, I kill it. And that feels like a white card, so that's kind of weird. Destroy target attacking creature that dealt 3 or more damage to you. That's what we're doing here. This is a white card now. This card has a surprising number of modes for a common. It's probably an uncommon. There's probably too much going on here for a common in terms of the complexity, because of how many different ways you can turn it on and for how many different amounts. And it's also going to make combat really weird, because I can make something smaller and mess with combat, or I can kill something but I kill it after it hit me, which is kind of weird. I like this line of text, is actually what I like. I like give -X, where X is the most life any player lost this turn. That's a cool card. It still feels kind of white to me, so I'm not sure we would actually print that. You may spill your own blood. Frankly, this would probably just be printed as you may pay 3 life. Bloodthorn Acolyte, 1R for a creature, Goblin Barbarian. It's a 2/1. Bloodthorn Acolyte enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it if you spilled blood this turn or spill your own blood. Oh my god. Now we're mixing these words, and this is a common. and I have to understand what all these different words mean. Oh my god. So this mechanic was really cool to begin with because I was like, oh, we're going to do these things where I'm going to want to mix these cards with this thing that you can do with all these magic cards. We had a really good modular mechanic here. We had a mechanic where it mixes with almost every card in Magic's existence. That's great. There's so many ways to cause players to lose life, whether it's my opponent's or my own. Just attacking with creatures. That's all I gotta do. Attack with creatures, and I've turned this mechanic on. And yet, 2 of the 3 commons say, I know you're supposed to mix this with other cards, but just we don't need to do that. Just you can turn this on anyways. This hoop we set up for you, we're just gonna give it to you. Yeah, I don't like that. I don't like that the commons. That's the kind of thing I'd expect to see on like the rare or maybe an uncommon. Here's the A to B to C, like this is another A to B to C kind of thing. That's not your commons. That's your uncommons and rares if you do it at all. If this card was just 1R, 2/1, gets a +1/+1 counter if somebody has lost 3 or more life, that'd be fine. There's nothing wrong with that card. Kind of playing in Bloodthirst space, but slightly worse, maybe slightly better under weird circumstances, that card's fine. Jund Vengeant, it's a 3 mana, green creature, human warrior. It's a 3/3. You may cast this spell as though it had flash if you spilled blood this turn or spill your own blood. I've seen 4 cards, and 3 of them have given me the option to just spill my own blood to do this thing. That should just be the mechanic at this point. If that's what you want to do, make that the mechanic. Make that built in the mechanic. At this point, that's the mechanic. At this point, we don't have 2 mechanics worded the same way. We have just 1 mechanic. Arguably printable as is without 2G 3/3 flash. That card's printable at uncommon. I don't think we've done it, but it's printable. The problem here is that the times you're going to want to cast this with flash are almost always going to be times where no blood has been spilled yet. So this is another case where we're putting this mechanic on and then we're giving you the out clause, and it's even worse because you always want to use the out clause. So this is going downhill from the card that said, here's the mechanic and that's cool, to the card that says, here's the mechanic, but if you can't meet it, here's the thing you do. So the card that just basically should just say, this costs 3 life. I guess I can do this end of turn after I've taken a hit, but that's not really what I want to be doing with the 3 mana 3/3. Goring Torian, 3 mana red creature. It's a Minotaur Berserker. It's a 2/1. Goring Torian has double strike as long as you spilled blood this turn. So that's a big upgrade. Probably wouldn't print 3 mana 2/1 double strike full stop. Possible we have and I'm just missing it. And spilling blood before double strike turns on is hard, because the most common way to spill blood, and the thing that should be turning this mechanic on, is normal attacking and blocking, or just attacking and not being blocked. So in order to turn this on, this uncommon, so a draft card, because I'm probably not playing this card in Constructed, I need to be lava spiking my opponent. And this one doesn't have the out clause. Like, this is the one that most needs the out clause to be a functional card. Every other card could have been functional, and this one needs the out clause, and it doesn't have it. And if I don't spill blood, it's a 3 mana 2/1, which is terrible. It's so sad. It's such a sad little Minotaur. He's not Berserk at all. I like the flavor. Berserker is spilling blood. Zatang says, cowards that spill blood can't block blood-covered warriors. The blood continues to spill after Obsidian Fireheart has left the battlefield. Blood is all over the place. We're going downhill even further here. It even has like this weird rules corner case confusion thing where, like, if I attack with this creature and a first striker that does 3 damage to my opponent, and my first striker spills blood, and then this guy's like, I've got double strike now, except it's too late. And it's such a sad moment. Here, I wish it at least worked with a first striker. Field of Gore, a rare land. Field of Gore enters the battlefield tapped unless you spilled blood this turn or spill your own blood. So we've got a shock land, but it's now a bolt land, and it taps for B, R, or G. This line of text all by itself on a tap land is a tri-land. We've seen those cards. They're constructed worthy. So, you know, there's a little bit of room to improve, and the room for improvement on this one is I can pay 3 life or have somebody else pay 3 life. If we ever did these cards, we would just say, you know what? Shock lands are 2 life for 2 colors. Now we're going to print bolt lands that are 3 life for 3 colors, and we'd just be done. Here you go. How about monocolored lands that come into play tapped unless you take 1 damage, or a colorless land that doesn't make you pay any life? We can just complete the cycle. Bolt land, 3 colors. Done. Part of that is because that card, this theoretical bolt land, if we were to do a bolt land, theoretically would get reprinted again in the future. And when we print a really simple, obvious design, and it's powerful, and we know players are going to like it, and we're probably going to print it again in 5 years, things like the shock lands and other dual lands, and things like shock and lightning bolt and whatever, there's 2 things you're looking for. You're looking to make sure that it doesn't use any block mechanics, and you're looking to make sure that the name is generic enough that it can be reused. Field of Gore is nice and generic, great, but we would never use a block mechanic on this card. A very long-winded way of saying that a card like this theoretically could exist. It's a cool design. a little bit derivative. I wouldn't put a block mechanic on it, so it's kind of unfortunate that probably the best design so far is not a place where we'd actually want to use the block mechanic that we're being shown. Rare, blood will flow. Great. We've been having the blood flow for this entire submission. Let's see how well it flows now. 1 BB sorcery. For each creature, spill its controller's blood unless they sacrifice it. This is like the third way we've used this mechanic, I think. First it was a condition you checked, then it was an action you can take on yourself, and now it's a game action the game takes. Like, first you did the action, now the game does the action. Basically, this is a Punisher card in the vein of the Torments from Amonkhet block. For each creature, that player sacrifices it or loses 3 life. Like, that's all this says. For the drawback of allowing players to save their creatures by paying life, because that's what it actually is. This is actually a drawback, not the greatest way to show off your mechanic. We get 1 mana off Damnation. Awesome new mechanic as a drawback to make our cards cheaper. It does let me keep my own creatures, which makes it arguably better than Wrath in that sense. So yeah, that's maybe it's not strictly a downside. No, I think that's cool, actually. I can play this in my control deck, and I can pay 3 life to keep my Torrential Gearhulk. Obviously much better against a opponent with lots of creatures with lower life, so maybe I play this in an aggro black deck where I have a high life total and my opponent has a low life total. The more I think about it, the more I like this card. I just would never expect to see special terminology used for such a simple action. Like, this card is way more complicated being spelled out. The thing that the mechanic actually cares about, which is, did somebody lose life? The Bloodthirst part is awesome. This part is barely pretending to be a card of this mechanic. Design 8 Insatiable Kresh, 1 BRG, it's the right colors, it's good old Jund. Return to Shards of Alara Reborn. Legendary creature, Vampire Warrior. 1/1, when Kresh the Insatiable enters the battlefield, spill each opponent's blood. So we're using it as an action. Whenever you spill blood, put that many +1/+1 counters on Insatiable Kresh. That's some lovely reminder text. You spill blood whenever a player loses 3 or more life. Doesn't matter what the player, you did it. Take credit for everything, though, if you're playing Jund. And get 3+ counters as a result. That's weird text. Get 3+ counters as a result. So this is like a lose life trigger because it cares about the number. To my surprise, I didn't think this was possible. We found another way to care about spilling blood. Care about how much blood was spilled. He wants you to spill a lot of blood. Forget all the fancy words. You know what I'm going to do with this card? I'm going to smash it down on turn 4 as a 4/4. That drains my opponent for 3. And then I'm going to swing with the 3/3 I already have at play and make it a 7/7. So I've got a 7/7 on turn 4. This card's ridiculous. This card is ridiculous. Totally mythic. This is the most mythic I've seen all night here, so this is awesome. I love it. I think this like mixes all the possible ways spilling blood can be done on one card. It's a mess. Spilling blood, it turns out, very messy. So if this was the only card that got weird, I'd be really happy. If all the other cards had been simple Bloodthirst and this was kind of like, here's the mythic and this does this cool thing, that'd be awesome. I love this card. In a vacuum, this single card is really cool. And I wish that the rest of the cards had shown me the simpler one take on spilling blood rather than here's 3 different takes that are very, very similar but slightly different. This feels like somebody had an idea, they built all the different variations and play tested them all at once, which is fine, that's cool. That's totally great advice. If you have a mechanic and you have lots of different ways you think that mechanic might manifest, design all those cards, stuff them in a deck, stuff them in 2 decks, play them against each other, use pre-constructed decks, and try to remember which pieces of the mechanic you liked, but hone in on it. And just keep taking stuff away until you can find the simplest, perfect execution that does one thing, and then make lots of that. And then prove to yourself that that mechanic can hold up your commons and uncommons just by its simple self, and then make mythics like this. I actually think this mechanic has a lot of promise. The execution leaves a little bit to be desired. Now it's time for Mr. Geist. Goblin Tag Team. To common, it costs 1 and a red. Goblin Warrior. It's a 2/1, so a decent rate already. Bloodied. When Goblin Tag Team enters the battlefield, if you lost life this turn, create a 1/1 red Goblin creature token with a reminder text of damage causes loss of life, which I appreciate. I like that reminder text on commons. Someone should have let Jeremy know that spilling blood was last submission and we weren't spilling blood anymore. We're done with this. This is just a drop of blood, though. It can be any amount of life. Obviously, the difference here is 1, it can be any amount of life, and 2, it's just you, which is surprisingly a much harder thing to pull off. So just immediately, I am seeing this common and going, how do I turn this on? I have no way to turn this on by itself. This is not a thing I can do in a natural game of Magic. There's no scenario where this is going to come up in a limited game that I'm playing with normal limited cards. This creature doesn't have flash, so I can't cast it on my opponent's turn after they attack me. Mana burn doesn't exist. There's just no way for me to turn this on, so this is going to need a lot of support, and that's scary. You're setting yourself up for a lot harder job when you create a mechanic that needs support. A mechanic that doesn't automatically work, at least at some level, with your usual limited commons. I'm expecting to see some support, which I'm thinking is also going to make for a lot of kind of clunky cards, because none of these cards are going to be able to bloody you and come into play as bloodied. I guess that's not technically true, but this is going to be really clunky. So I don't have high hopes for this, but at the same time, if Jeremy pulls it off, that'll be awesome. So let's see what we got. Debone, common, 1B and a sorcery. Return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Great. It's a really bad Raise Dead so far. Bloodied. If you lost life this turn, you may return another target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Okay, there's like 3 different problems here. I'd rather just pay 3 mana and get 2 creature cards back straight up, which is a common that we do regularly now. Getting a single mana discount is not worth jumping through the hoop that I don't know how to jump through yet. I don't know how to jump through this hoop yet, and I'm starting to get a little bit worried. How am I losing this life on my turn? I really wish this cared about anybody's life being lost, because then the normal thing you would do is attack, and then every once in a while you'd be able to build that deck where like pain lands and stuff turned on. That'd be cool. But we already talked about that with the other blood mechanic. Blood's all over the place. I don't know what to do. Blood's going to my head. Not a fan of bloody. I think with keywords like that, so many people design it thinking, why hasn't this been done? And the answer is that it just doesn't work well. That is an amazing comment, Inanimate. A lot of times you'll be like, this is a really cool line of text. This is a really cool mechanic. Why hasn't it been done before? I found new untapped design space. I'm a super smart designer, and I'm going to be cool and prove that I can do this cool new thing. Don't get me wrong, it's great. Maybe you did find something cool, and I don't want to like harsh your excitement, but most of the time, I promise it's been thought of. I showed up at Wizards 11 years ago, and almost everything I said, can we do this, can we do this, can we do this, had been tried. I remember pushing for things like double-faced cards and miracles, whatever, trigger on draw, things like that. Like, all of those stuff, I came out, I'm like, how can we do these things? These are awesome things. And like, we've thought about it. We don't know how to do it in a way that makes sense. Or we tried it and it was terrible. Like, there's really common veins of design space if you go to card creation threads. The reason Wizards doesn't do them is they usually don't work out. And so you come up with this concept here, do this thing if I've been damaged, and you're like, I've never seen this before. It seems really simple and clean and elegant, and you're right about all that stuff. You should always ask yourself, why hasn't this been done? Wizards has been doing Magic for 25 years now. If something just simply hasn't been done, one of 2 things is true. Either no one's thought of it, or there's a reason, and most likely there's a reason. That doesn't mean it can't be done. Sometimes the reason is silly, and we get dinosaurs eventually. Your ideal mechanics, your ideal new mechanics, at least mechanics that go on commons, have to be able to stand on their own. You can't put a mechanic on common, therefore it's a limited mechanic. If it's on a common, it needs to be something that works on its own. And by on its own, I mean works with things that you can reasonably expect to be in a Magic set. So it works with creatures, it works with attacking, it works with instants and sorceries, it works with artifacts, it works with enchantments. These are things that maybe you have to change numbers around, but I can look at your mechanic and I can say, oh, Metalcraft. Oh, I see, that's pretty easy. There's just going to be more artifacts at common. That's pretty easy. But I look at Bloodied and I'm like, cards that deal me damage, that's not a really common theme. Are we going to have like a bunch of cards that lose life? And is that fun? I mean, that's obviously the direction this is going. And yeah, like enabling Bloodied is a lot easier in Constructed. I don't have any question that this mechanic would actually be pretty strong in Constructed with the right cards. Painlands exist, Bitter Blossom exists, Stark Confidant exists. This is just normal stuff that Magic does. But in Limited, that's not a normal thing. And so I would expect there would be a lot of that at common. And is it something white is doing? So here's a perfect example. We have a white common, which tells me that I want my Bloodied enablers to have some in white, but white doesn't do that. Like, if I'm damaging myself, that's black and red. That's just what black and red do. What does a white Bloodied enabler look like? I have no idea. Apprehend, common for 3 mana, 2 and a white. Instant, tap up to 2 target creatures. Bloodied, those creatures don't untap during their controller's next untap step if you lost life this turn. On my turn, it's a double freeze, which is really powerful if I can bloody myself. Otherwise, it's just a falter. On your turn, I can either falter, or I can wait till you've hit me, and then I can like do a pseudo next turn falter because now I've lost life. So I like that this card at least has some way to turn it on without enablers. I would expect to see a number of those, so That's cool. This has a ton of different modes. There's a lot of ways to use this card, and they're all at least something I might do occasionally. Eric's comment, I think this is a bit more puzzling than I would want for a common. It's definitely borderline. Some of the puzzling is sort of hidden puzzling, like I was saying earlier. I'm making an assumption that there's enablers at common. There has to be for this environment to work. Level 0 with this card is I find an enabler, I turn it on, and I get a cool blowout. And level 1 is, oh, I wait till I get hit and I do this, or I just do this. Handy Assassin. 3B for a creature. It's an Orc Assassin. Who would have guessed that the assassin is an assassin? It's a 4/2 with Bloodied. 1B, discard Handy Assassin. Target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn. Activate this ability only if you lost life this turn. Okay, this one is very interesting. Normally, it's just a 4-mana 4/2. If I'm willing to take a hit from a creature, I can then kill the creature, which is cool. This is what I was hoping to see more of. Cards where you can understand how to use it without any enablers. And unfortunately, we're up to uncommon. There was one of the 3 commons that it turned itself on. This uncommon also sort of turns itself on. You can play it under normal game scenarios. Yeah, I like this card. It's got 2 completely different modes, but totally a fair card. I would expect to see these kind of things. Yeah. The other way I could have seen this would be have it be an activated ability on the creature that's already on the battlefield. You cast it, then you just don't block. But I like this a lot. Lightning Assault, another uncommon. Red-white, sorcery. Lightning should be instant. Lightning Assault, RW, sorcery. Creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain your choice of First Strike, Vigilance, or Haste until end of turn. That card seems fine just straight up. It's a little bit weak, but fine. Bloodied. If you lost life this turn, instead those creatures get +1/+1 and gain First Strike, Vigilance, and Haste. Okay, so the reward for doing the really complicated thing to enable Bloodied on my turn, because I don't know what that is. I don't know what that thing is that I'm doing. Presumably, I cast a creature that damaged me or something. The reward is I get all 3 instead of just 1. That's not that much of an upgrade. I'm not super excited about that. I was expecting +2/+2. This is not telling me why I want to play Bloodied, and it's not telling me how I get Bloodied. I'm not excited about this card. There's not really anything going for it, and it's also a 2-color card, so this should be a draft build around. It's an uncommon, it's gold. Gold uncommons should give you really strong direction. That's just their purpose. Generally speaking, an uncommon should give you a draft purpose anyways, give you some direction, because uncommons you see them less often, and they should kind of drive where you're going. But if it's gold, you're committing to 2 colors and you need to get a reward for that, so it should really drive you. And this doesn't really tell me to do anything I wouldn't otherwise be doing in red and white, which is playing creatures and attacking. Truzy the Ambusher. This is a rare. Black and red for a legendary Goblin Shaman. It's a 2/2, so decent rate to start with. Bloodied. You may cast creature and sorcery spells as though they have flash if you lost life this turn. So that's great. I totally understand how that works. You hit me, now I'm bloodied, so I cast all my stuff with flash. Cool. A little bit weird in that by the time you hit me, flashy creatures can't block and all of my flashy sorceries can't stop me from taking damage. I see the thing. I don't know why I want to do the thing necessarily because I can't get the normal reward for flash, but that's fine. It's a deck building challenge. It's not like this is a terrible rate. It's a 2-mana 2/2. I think the biggest drawback of this is my opponent isn't going to feel super enthusiastic about turning this on, and that's a super huge risk. So let's say I'm like, my creatures and sorceries have flash, so I'm going to leave my mana up, and then my opponent is like, haha, I tricked you. I'm not attacking you. And I'm like, great, I did nothing. That was fun. Let's try it again. So then I just cast my creatures and sorceries normally, and I didn't have this card. So that's not a great experience. Now, of course, it's a rare. It's a constructed card. I'm probably playing Pain Lands and other ways to give myself bloodied. But at that point, it's a rare. Why doesn't it just not have this ability? You can cast creature and sorcery spells as though they had flash, period. Just straight up. The problem with Bloodied on rares forward is that it's so trivially easy to turn on in constructed that the bonus can't even be that big of a deal, and it's almost pointless to have the bonus at all. So I'm starting to not enjoy Bloodied as a constructed mechanic. Cube Miser asks, is that much different than most basic keyword abilities that are good in drafts, but rare cards with the ability is usually unplayed and constructed? It's kind of the opposite, actually. We're talking about Bloodied as an ability that, so far as I can see, barely playable in draft, because I haven't seen any enablers, and it's not something you can naturally turn on unless you draft around it. But in constructed, it's just always on. Think of this as like Revolt, but even harder to turn on in draft. But in constructed, it's just always on. It's a constructed only keyword that's masquerading as something that we're going to pretend maybe you can do in limited. The challenge wasn't to design a rare mechanic, it was to design a mechanic you could put at common. Ruben points out that this is like Revolt. Revolt is trivially easy to turn on in constructed because of fetch lands And this is kind of the same thing where it might as well just have the text spelt out. And of course, casting things as flash is a blue and a green thing, and this is a black-red, so this is like completely off base from the color buy perspective too. I mean, I get like, oh yeah, I had to take damage to do it. This card doesn't do it for me. And I wanted to like Bloodied too, because I wanted to like Spilled Blood, and that kind of carried over into wanting like Bloodied. There's something there. You mix Bloodied and Spilled Blood, and now you have Blood Soup, and as we know, that's delicious. Oh, that's Blood Pudding. Design 7. Berserker's Blade is a rare, costs 2 mana. It's an equipment. Bloodied. At the beginning of your end step, if you lost life this turn, put a rage counter on Berserker's Blade. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each rage counter on Berserker's Blade. Cool. So it's a thematic card. My blade gets angry the more I get hit. I get hit and my blade goes, I'm gonna smash you back. Cool flavor. Why my end step? So I can't even turn this on by being attacked. I have to turn this on somehow. I have no idea how to turn this on, but it's a rare, so it's inconstructed, so I'm probably just pinging myself every turn, and so therefore we kind of have to evaluate this as if it just gets bigger every turn, and that card's fair. I don't know if we've done that equipment yet, the rare equipment that's just, I get a little bit bigger every turn, and that's what I do, but I expect to see a card like that someday, and this is kind of playing in that space, so design's fine. I think it's better than the flash card in that, like, there's no juking with your opponent of like, oh, my opponent's gonna get me bloodied, oh, just kidding, like, I have to do this, I have to turn this on. I almost like the nod to that now that I think about it. I still think it should say at the beginning of the turn, although then you could do it twice a turn, and that might be too good. Yeah, I don't think there's a good solution to that. I like this. It's probably the best design I've seen so far because I understand how it's used and how it's turned on. Demonic Loan Shark. Our mythic rare, 3 BB for a demon, 5/5 flyer, B, pay 2 life, draw a card. Okay, I like it. So far, that's great. Let's see what the Bloodied does. I expect this to be a drawback. At the beginning of your end step, discard your hand unless you lost life. It was a drawback. It was a drawback all along. It's a demon. It was a trick. All right, so we've made a deal with this demon. We've made a deal with this demon. We get a reasonably cheap creature with a really good ability, drawing lots of cards, good old Necropotence, good old bargain. But the bargain is if we don't use his ability at least once a turn or otherwise lose life, we lose our hand. That's not even that big of a drawback. Presumably, if I've stopped paying life to draw cards, hopefully I've played out my hand mostly. I'm not going to discard a ton of cards. A little bit of attention, a little bit of a hurry up and use your cards or you're going to get punished flavor, but like the drawback's not crazy terrible. I can keep it going long enough to get my hand laid out. I like Greed. I've always liked Greed. Greed's a great card. It's at the right price, I think, for Constructed. And there's other ways to turn this on. This card is good. I like this card. Actually, one of my favorite designs of this ability. And it's also the only Bloodied card that has the life loss built in. So it came up. We had to get to Mythic Rare, but we found a card that turns itself on. Done. Ship it. All right, Ryan, what do you got? Design 1, Tap Dancing Centaur. 2 and a green for a Centaur, 3/3. Rhythm 2. Rhythm? Oh, I can't wait. I love Rhythm. Rhythm 2. If this is the second spell you cast this turn, it is cast in Rhythm. If you cast Tap Dancing Centaur in Rhythm, it enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter. Okay, so I designed this mechanic. One of the first cards I made that saw print. Talara's Battalion. Cast the spell only if you've cast another green spell this turn. So it's a little personal. I like it. I like this mechanic. We've seen variations on this. Illusory Angel's another one. Cast Illusory Angel only if you cast another spell this turn. There's also, of course, Surge. Only if your teammate has cast another spell this turn. Pretty much invariably, all of these mechanics are about being the second spell in a turn, except for a few weirdos like this lovely card where if you cast 4 spells, you do a thing. There's things like this, but most of the mechanics of this nature care about the second spell. And the reason they care only about the second spell is because casting 2 spells in a turn is a hoop. It's already a good enough hoop. It's an interesting hoop. Really, it's a non-trivial hoop. It's way harder than it sounds because you want to generally be casting a 1-drop, a 2-drop, a 3-drop, a 4-drop. Your deck's generally weaker if you're planning on going 1-drop, 2-drop, 1+2, 2+2. You're probably a very aggressive deck. So Surge on higher end cards like 3 mana, it just doesn't really fit into either of those game styles. So 2 cards is actually a really big deal. Casting 2 spells in a turn is a big deal. So that tells me 2 things. 1, I'm not convinced this needs to be parameterized. It could just be Rhythm, I think. If this is the second spell you cast this turn. Although I see where they're going. It has to be exactly the second spell. So I'm expecting to see a Rhythm 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4, and then we'll be 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm seeing a lot of chat about Rhythm 5 and Rhythm 1 through 3 and the varied gameplay there. And yeah, that's kind of what I was saying. Like, let's be realistic. The odds of you getting to a 3rd spell in a turn means you've built a Storm deck. It just doesn't happen. You don't... Just think about the last time you cast 3 spells in a game of Magic and didn't just win on the spot. not because you cast 3 bolts or because you went Manamorphose, kill you. It doesn't happen. You don't cast 3 spells in a turn. That's not a thing you do. If you're doing it, it's because you set your deck up to do that. One, it means that Rhythm 2 is fine. Like, it's not going to be that often that you're going to have like 2 Rhythm 2 guys and be like, well, I wanted to cast 3 spells this turn, but I can't. That's going to happen like in very narrow circumstances. And it also means that if we see a Rhythm 3, that card better be really, really exciting, because that's going to be really hard to set up, and hopefully not a card that goes in a Storm deck, because that's where it would naturally go. I think the reward is fine. Normally this is a 3 mana 3/3, which is fine. If I somehow get this later in the game, and it's going to be hard to cast this late in the game and still get 2 spells in. I do all these hoops and I get a 3 mana 4/4, but it's on turn like 5 or 6, so that's fine. Yeah, I like this. I'm, again, maybe a little bit biased here because this was one of my first mechanics myself, but I love this mechanic a lot. So, Lullaby. It's a common. 1U. Oh, I get it. Lullaby, Rhythm. We've got a theme here. We've got a tap dancing, we got a lullaby. 1U for an aura, enchant creature, Rhythm 2. If you cast lullaby in Rhythm, tap enchanted creature. Enchanted creature doesn't untap during its controller's untap step. That's a normal card. This card's fine. I do think it's good that we've got a 2 mana Rhythm card. I hope that most of the Rhythm cards tend to be cheap because that makes it easier that you can do the 1/2 thing. I do see one little drawback of this. Most of the time, I'm gonna want to cast this pre-combat, which means I'm probably spending all my mana, casting my creature and this, and then attacking. Yeah, that's fine, that's fine. It means I can't use combat tricks, but that's fine. Is this more or less appealing than the OGW version? Containment Membrane? I don't know, so this doesn't actually tap the creature though, so that's a big difference. The difference in power level between a dehydration that actually taps the creature is pretty big because it gives you a lot more opportunities to use it. I think Lullaby is better than Containment Membrane from a power level perspective and from a gameplay perspective. Ominous Music, B, Sorcery, Rhythm 1. If this is the first, oh, cool, I wasn't expect. So this Rhythm 1 is doing things that my mechanic that I originally was talking about can't do. So this is different. This is cool. I like it. Now we see why numbers are here. Let's see if this is worth it. Rhythm 1. Return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. If you cast Ominous Music in Rhythm, add B. Interesting. So it's a Raise Dead, and it's free if it's cast in Rhythm. And not only that, but by being free, this helps me enable my Rhythm too. So I see where this is going. I like this a lot. I really like this design. This is a really neat enabler that has like all the right moving pieces for it. And it's got a great name to it. It's Ominous Music. I'm going to cast Ominous Music. What's going to happen? What's going to happen? You don't know yet. It's coming! I love this card. I love this card. I want to cast this to set off my Rhythm Chains. That's a cool card. I don't know if this card can see, like anytime you add mana, free spells are always risky. This is doing something relatively low risk for a free spell. Raise Dead is not a generally constructed level effect. It's a little risky, but I love this risk. I think we need to take risks. This card is awesome. We've got a comment from Cube Miser that Rhythm would be more interesting if it was per team. There's a good chance it would be per team. It might even just be like players. Then your opponent can screw up your Rhythm, but I kind of like that. If I'm like doing my little dance and my opponent's like, hold on, I'm like, I drop all the balls. Like I was juggling and I dropped the balls. My opponent can screw up my Rhythm. That totally makes sense. Metronome Keeper, uncommon, 1W for a creature, human knight. Wow, 1W for a 3/2. Something's going on here. It's got Rhythm 3, so that's a pretty high number, but it's a 2 mana card, so maybe that'll happen if I've got my enablers working. That's a lot of work though. When Metronome Keeper enters the battlefield, return a creature you control to its owner's hand. Then, if you cast Metronome Keeper in Rhythm, create a 2/2 White Knight creature token. So the starting point is it's a 1W 3/2 that forces me to bounce a creature, which is a pretty big drawback. White Mane Lion being flash was kind of the point. The fact that you can't use it to save something takes away most of the utility. It has its upsides, but it's a pretty big drawback, so that's actually a bit underpowered now that I've read it. But I get a 2/2 if I cast it as the 3rd spell a turn. This is weird. I'm going to cast my enabler, then I'm going to cast my Rhythm 2 card. Hopefully that Rhythm 2 card has an enters the battlefield effect. Then I'm going to cast my Rhythm 3 card and return my Rhythm 2 card to my hand, so I can do it next turn to do the thing again. There's a lot of things I would try to do with this thing. This is interesting. I really like this card. I really like Rhythm, and it's both parasitic and modular. Like, all of the cards work with existing cards. You can cast any random Rhythm card in a deck that has no other Rhythm cards, and it does its thing, and it's pretty cool. And then, like, somehow all the Rhythm cards are working together to create a song that is, more than the sum of its rhythms. I like this. I like this a lot. I feel like there's something here I should be commenting on. It is very complex. There's a lot going on. This looks like a game I want to try. It might be too complicated. The whole sequencing thing, having to, like, set up my hand so I can sequence things things is probably a little busy, probably having to look too far ahead. So I could predict this being a pain in the butt to play. It's kind of reminiscent of the Suspend Storm deck in the Masters draft and Time Spiral draft. I'm a little bit worried. I'm a little bit worried that anything beyond Rhythm 2 is going to be hard to do. Q-Miser does have a point. It's a little bit complicated for Uncommon. And, you know, the more I think about it, the more, you know, I said maybe there should be one Rhythm 3 at Uncommon and one at Rare. Something like this would probably be the Rare. Just some weird combo machine type card for Constructed. And then the Uncommon would be something a little bit simpler. I think there's possibilities here. I wouldn't want too many Rhythm 3s. I'd want, like, if we were to do Rhythm, I think Rhythm 1 is easy to do. Anyone can hit Rhythm 1. Rhythm 2 is not too hard to hit. That's pretty normal gameplay. And we'd want, like, 1 or 2 Rhythm 3s. Raindrops on Rooftops. Uncommon. You. Instant. Rhythm 2. If you cast Raindrops on Rooftops in Rhythm... Wow, that's a tongue twister. If you cast Raindrops on Rooftops in Rhythm... We're going to have to sing the cards now, because that's the only way you're in Rhythm. So if you cast Raindrops on Rooftops in Rhythm, which means the second spell of the turn, you get to scry 2, and then you draw cards. Any other time, this is just you instant draw card. But if it's the second spell you cast, you get to scry 2. So if it's the second spell you cast, it's Preordain. It's Preordain. I will remind everybody, Preordain is banned in Modern for a reason. It's one of the best cantrips ever printed. That being said, if you had to cast it as the second spell in your turn, that removes a lot of its utility. I don't get the flavor. This is not a I don't get the flavor of Raindrops on Rooftops, but as a card, this definitely hits a sweet spot that, like, calls to me as a spike that likes to do Johnny type things. I'm a little bit worried that this card is just going to get cut for being too risky. I'm going to read Eric's comments. I bet he's going to say he's just going to cut it. No, he doesn't say that. Okay. He does talk about it being a bit mathy and hard to keep track of Rhythm on top of all the other things you're doing. And that's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. A card that can scry and draw a card is a sequencing decision tree. It's kind of some of that pseudo-hidden complexity in Magic that us, you know, high-end spikes like to think about, and we don't want to force on our more casual players. So I don't think this is, like, super in your face. I think anybody who wants to play with this complexity is going to play with this complexity. Anybody who doesn't like complexity or doesn't like to think about complexity or doesn't think about complexity, you're just going to look at this and say, oh, I cast this as the second spell on my turn, so they're just going to be like, play my creature for the turn, do the thing. And they did the thing, and that was great. I don't think this is bad. I don't think this is that overloading because the people who are going to get overloaded by this are people who want to sign up for that. I like this card. I mean, it might be risky. The card might be too good, but I think as a designer, I actually like that it leverages all of the complexity on people who are okay with that complexity. Dance with me, with an exclamation point, very important. Dance with me, not you. It's a rare, it's 2R, sorcery, Rhythm 3, so okay. We have to get up to the third spell in a turn. That's a lot of work for a 3-mana spell. Gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap that creature, it gains haste until end of turn. If you cast this in Rhythm, whenever that creature attacks for the first time this turn, untap all attacking creatures you control. There's a digital combat phase. Okay, I don't like this card. I don't like this card at all. I don't like rare threatens. Threaten is a common effect for limited. It's not something I want to see at rare. The payoff is pretty cool. A really hard payoff to get to. If I want to be doing a deck that has extra attacking phases, that's something I'm going to want to be able to count on. It's not something I'm going to want to have to cast 3 spells in a turn to do, but more importantly, it's not something I'm going to want to have to count on my opponent having a target to do. If my win con is extra combat steps, I want to be able to do that even if my opponent's playing blue-white control. I don't like this card. I don't like the reward. I don't like it being a rare threaten. I'm really, 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 really cautious about anything that's Rhythm 3 or higher and having to be a really cool payoff that justifies me building a complicated deck to get to Rhythm 3. The white bounce creature, like, that does a lot of weird stuff. Like, I could build this mechanical deck that did a bunch of weird stuff every turn to get to Rhythm 3, and by doing so got to reuse ETB effects and get free tokens, and I'm playing a machine, and that's fun. This, like, I go bolt you, steal your creature, attack. And that's not the kind of payoff I think Rhythm 3. I think Rhythm 3 is a very Johnny mechanic, and you want a payoff that's a very Johnny thing, not a payoff that you stick in your mono-red creature deck. Don't like it. Come Marching In, it's a rare, 3W for an enchantment, Rhythm 3. When Come Marching In enters the battlefield, if you cast it in Rhythm, create 3 2/2 white knight creature tokens. Okay. So far, it does nothing unless I cast it in Rhythm. Whenever you cast a spell in Rhythm, creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. So, the most important effect of this, I need to cast this on Rhythm for. Like, making 3 tokens is clearly the biggest payoff here, and it's a 4-mana Rhythm 3. Like, how often am I going to do that? That's not going to happen. That's a really hard thing to do. Like, unless I'm going Mox, Come Marching In, or some other broken deck that shouldn't exist. Manamorphose, Come Marching. Like, I'm never casting this any point where 3 2/2 White Knight creature tokens is a good thing. I do like the second line of text. Whenever you cast a spell in Rhythm, creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. Or I should say, I like the trigger. I like the concept of keying off the thing. We usually do that. Usually when we have a keyword, we have the one build around that calls out the keyword. This is pretty standard design. I think it's more interesting here than normal because it's something that you naturally want to do in a Rhythm deck anyways. You want to sequence your spells and you're going to want to get the reward for the 1, the 2, and 3. But that being said, I don't think a Rhythm deck naturally lends itself to having a bunch of creatures on the board, especially with some of the other cards I've seen. I'm expecting more spell-oriented decks. Those tend to be easier to do rhythms. You know, cantrips that replace themselves so you have more spells. This whole package is a little bit weird. I don't like it. I don't like 4 mana Rhythm 3. I don't like creating 3 tokens late in the game when you're finally casting this, and I just don't think creature decks is where this is going to be. Like, I feel like this would be much more interesting if it was like Rhythm 2 or even Rhythm 1, and then you're just encouraged to cast it early, and then you get the whole reward for the rest of the game. I think there's something here. I definitely think someone's going to make this card if Rhythm is a mechanic in a set, but I don't like the reward. It doesn't fit with the play pattern. You want to make sure the reward you give fits the play pattern that is most natural with that mechanic, at least if you're only doing one thing. You're only going to do one Rhythm Matters card. Make that effect fit with the style of gameplay that you've told me to play, and the style of play in this case is lots of cheap spells that replace themselves, not curve out with my creatures. Crescendo Phoenix. We have reached the pinnacle of the song, the crescendo. 1 RR, Mythic Rare, Creature Phoenix, 3/1 Flyer, Rhythm 4. Holy frack, what are we getting for this? This is going to be good. When Crescendo Phoenix enters the battlefield, if you cast it in a rhythm, discard your hand, then draw 7 cards. Okay. No, I respect that. I put a lot of work into casting this guy, and I'm going to get 7 cards. When Crescendo Phoenix dies, you may exile it. If you do, you may cast Crescendo Phoenix from exile until the beginning of your next end step, which makes me do the thing again. Okay. Wow. Freaking ridiculous. So even though it's a creature, this actually rewards me for what my deck wants to do. I'm going to go cantrip, 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 Phoenix, draw my whole hand back up. Or I'm going to be like, bolt you, bolt you, bolt you, draw my whole hand back up. Like, all of my 1-mana instants are perfect with this card. I love this card. This card is bonkers. I want to build this deck. I want to go Mox, Manamorphose, Phoenix, draw 7. I love draw 7s. Draw 7s are so bonkers, though. Like, draw 7's never safe. You're playing with fire, no pun intended. So the other question is, do you ever cast this off rhythm? And I think you do because of the exile. On turn 3, I just cast this as a 3/1 flyer. My opponent trades with it, kills it, whatever, and then I get to cast it again, and I can keep doing that until I can get to the point where I've set myself up for a rhythm turn, and then I do the thing. So this card's insane. I can either do the draw 7, or I get a impossible to kill creature, which is really good, that I can just keep doing the thing until I can do the other crazy thing, and I do the other crazy thing. Oh my god. Good job. You just made a busted Mythic Rare. This card's going to be $60 and all over standard, and it's going to get banned. Bonkers. I don't think we would actually print a Rhythm 4, because the main problem with Rhythm 4 is, like, the reward has to justify all that work you did, and the only rewards you're going to get are going to be things like this that are just busted, or things that don't feel right. I did all this work and I got a slightly undercosted 7/7, so, like, none of these, no good can come of this. That's the problem with making cards that have really big hoops. You need to ask yourself as a designer, when you make this really big hoop, can you make it worth it, but also make it fair? It's a very, very, very thin needle to thread. The benefit is, like, if the hoop is big enough, if it's an 8-mana spell and it just wins the game, like, who cares? That's fine. 8-mana spells can win the game. And I guess, in a sense, this is kind of like an 8-mana spell, so okay. But you get there in a way that's a lot easier to cheat, and that's the risk here. This isn't just an 8-mana spell that wins the game. This could be an 8-mana spell, but what it really is, it's kind of masquerading as a 6-mana spell, where all of the cards you cast that turn helped you get to this card. This card is bonkers. That's all I have to say. I'm going to take this card, I'm going to stick it in Storm, in Modern. I'm just going to go frickin' haywire, and I'm never going to lose. So the other part of this is a cool card. It's Squee, but it's a much more flavorful Squee. It's a Phoenix-style Squee. I like this. You take off the rhythm. Just 1R, 3/1 flying. When it dies, you get to cast it. That's great. I like that card. It's still pretty good, but it's Mythic Rare, so it can be good. Yeah, so when I started off looking at the Rhythm cards, I was expecting that it really only needed to be Rhythm 2, and I think that Rhythm 2 is an interesting mechanic. I mean, it's Surge, we kind of did it. Rhythm 2 is a totally safe mechanic. And then I saw Rhythm 1, and I was like, oh, that's cool. Now it makes sense. And then we saw Rhythm 3 and 4, and Rhythm 3 and 4 are like, you just do broken things. There's no good that can come of that. You've made Storm now. You've made a card where, like, in order to cast it and get the value out of it, you have to do the thing that is insane. These cards go right on the Storm scale. I love it. Heritage Guardian, common, 4G creature elf warrior spirit. Woo! 3 types. I love it. I don't need to read anymore. Ship it. This card's great. It's a 4/4. Heritage Guardian and its descendant have trample. What the heck is a descendant? Ancestry 6G. You may pay 6G and exile this card from your graveyard as the ancestor of target creature you control. Add this card's power and toughness to its descendant's ancestry only as a sorcery. Okay, so this is like flashback aura haunt. You get your creature, it dies, and then you cast it out of your graveyard to make another creature bigger and kind of similar. This is Scavenge. It might actually be better than Scavenge in the sense that you can do things like its descendant has trample really easily, so you can grant more than just counters. Actually kind of surprised that it limited the mechanic straight up to power and toughness, rather than saying Heritage Guardian's descendant gets +4/+4 and has trample, like make it an aura. I'm a little surprised. Bestow just wrote it out, even though it always matched, which was nice. It didn't have to. It opened up space for later. Let's be fair, that's a place you have to be a little bit careful. You don't want to make your mechanic overly generic just for the sake of being overly generic. That's actually a bad thing, because the canonical example being kicker, you don't want a mechanic that can be any mechanic. You don't want a mechanic that can be too many things. You want a mechanic that very clearly states what it is. It does the thing. It does it well. It's evocative. It's clean. And then when you need to do a different thing, you make a new mechanic. And so you mine design space a little bit at a time, and that's good for the game. It keeps the game lasting longer. It keeps the variety of experiences spread out, and it keeps the sense of discovery going. There was a period of time after Kicker where everyone was like, well, that's just Kicker, that's just Kicker, that's just Kicker. And like, that doesn't feel good as a player. You don't like seeing a mechanic and going, oh, that's just like Kicker. So you don't want to make a mechanic too broad. And actually the version I was talking about is the too broad one. This one's fine. I like it. Let's see what we can do with this mechanic. This is a great, simple execution. I'm hoping to see it stay simple with the commons and get slightly more complicated as we move on. Legacy Protector, common, 2W, 2/2. When Legacy Protector enters the battlefield or becomes an ancestor, you gain 2 life. That's a cool trigger, and Ancestry 4W. Yeah, this is great. I like where this is going. The previous one was a 4/4 with trample that granted 4/4 and trample, so that lined up, and this one's a 2/2 with 2 life that grants 2/2 and 2 life. It's not a keyword, but it kind of feels the same, and that's cool. I really like this card. It's a really clean design. It sets things up that I don't know if our designer is going to be able to deliver on. It's setting things up with the expectation that the original creature and the ancestry are always the same. That's okay. That's actually what Bestow did. There was never a case where bestowing was any different from the creature itself. And that's okay. That's what I was talking about earlier. It's okay if it's very limited in that design space. But once you've set that expectation up, you got to continue it. And I'm hoping there aren't any, like, I'm slightly off variations. Destructive Relative, common, R for a 1/1, okay, pretty underpowered so far. Just generally speaking, 1-mana 1/1s need a lot of oomph to be played. Destructive Relative or its descendant dies, it deals damage equal to its power to target player. Ooh, oh, that's saucy. Ancestry 3R. So just straight up by itself, it's a 1-mana 1/1. When it dies, it deals an extra damage. That's underpowered, but there are limited environments in which I would begrudgingly play that as a 23rd card. It's not a card I want to play, but that card is borderline cool. But then I can be like, oh, okay, it's coming back, and I'm going to put it on this 4/4, and now this 4/4, when you trade with it, you still take 4. That's pretty cool. I don't know if I'd play this card. It's probably still a little bit underpowered because it's kind of like a 1-mana 1/1 plus a Lava Axe, and those are both pretty bad cards. But it's niche. It's like a C-level common that you put in your mono-red aggressive draft deck, and you get to do crazy things, and your opponent gets all frustrated that you beat them with this crap card, and you're like, I beat you with 3 copies of this crap card. I love this card. I love this card a lot. Yeah, no, I love this card a lot. Maybe it's way better than I think it is. Maybe the fact that it doesn't cost you a card to Lava Axe makes it way better. I agree this feels more like an uncommon, because you're grafting on things a bit more complicated and you're doing higher amounts of damage and things like that. But one of the reasons you exile the card is literally so you can just tuck it underneath, and that's a thing that R&D has like embraced as a thing. It's common. It's expected behavior. We have embraced that behavior to the point where it's part of the tournament guidelines, and Mitgo and Arena all do it. You know what? It's still a cool design, so obviously I would expect a designer to be dinged for this in a contest, but generally speaking, if somebody in R&D came to me and made this card and said, let's make this card, and we just changed it to an uncommon, like we do that all the time. So, Lineage Historian, it's an uncommon, it's 3U. Creature Merfolk Spirit, 2/2. When Lineage Historian enters the battlefield or becomes an ancestor, look at the top 3 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. Okay, so just straight up, it's a 4-mana 2/2, get a card. That's actually pretty playable all by itself. 4-mana 2/2 draw one of 3 cards is pretty decent, and Ancestry 3 UU, so you get to do it again, and give something +2/+2. This is a lot. It's a cool card, but there's so much value here. This is first pick uncommon. I'm really excited to play this as long as we're not in a Zendikar speed format. Obviously, the rate's easy to fix, but you'd probably have to make the Ancestry quite a bit in order to tone it down. At that point, maybe it's not an interesting card. I mean, for starters, it could just draw a card. Like, it should just draw a card. Let's simplify it, make it a little bit weaker. And even then, you'd probably need to make the Ancestry a bit smaller. I think this effect's most interesting on a 1/1. I think that's where I would go with this, is I'd make it like a 3-mana 1/1, draw a card, Ancestry 5. So it's kind of like Think Twice with a little bit of a bonus. That's what I'd probably do. Design 5. Mausoleum Caretaker, uncommon, 2B, creature vampire spirit, 1/1. When Mausoleum Caretaker or its descendant dies, you may return another target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. I hate this card already. Ancestry 1BB. So the reason I hate this card is it's very like anti-synergistic with what you want to be doing already. Ancestry is already a graveyard recycling mechanic, and now you've got this other angle over here where you're recycling your graveyard and it stops you from this other thing. You know, it still works because I get the creature back and I cast it and get the effect again, and I'm still going to get Ancestry it later. And so in a weird sense, this card lets me Ancestry some other card 4 total times, which that's just grindy. That's like what we've tried to move away from. We've tried to get away from the pure value grind being the correct way to go, so I don't like this card. I don't like where this card is going. It's the first real miss for me. Kind of potentially shows a little bit of a lack of understanding of what mechanics should be doing. It almost feels like they were just putting this on whatever mechanic cards have, because they've gone through every color now. So green was trample, and white gained some life, and red dealt some damage, and blue drew a card, and now what does black do? Of course, black raised deads, but raised dead is just weird. That concerns me a little bit. If I was reading this as an actual judge for this contest, this would probably throw me off a lot more than it possibly seems like it should. I'm not evaluating this card in a vacuum. I'm looking at this going, well, this really scares me that you decided that this was the thing that you want to do with this other mechanic that does a similar but different thing, and together they make this weird grindy puzzle that is not really what Magic should be doing at uncommon in limited. Discard, lose a life, draw a card. You could have made your opponent lose life, and then the red could have done something else. There's a few different things. Lifelink would have been really cool. Probably okay at an uncommon at the right costs. Brushfire Witch, rare, 1 RG, now we're into gold cards. Creature, Goblin, Shaman, Spirit, I love it, 3 types. 1/1, Brushfire Witch and its descendant have 1 RG. This creature deals X damage to any target, and this creature gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is its power. Ancestry 4 RG. This is just weird. This is weird. I really want Descendant to be all about things that make the creature itself better. Things that you would say, what creatures can I combo this with to make it interesting? And the creature dealing damage is like, it's kind of separate from all that. Certainly a creature having the ability to deal damage is a pretty normal thing, but granting a creature the ability to deal damage doesn't make any sense. It's not something that means anything except for very corner cases with things like Lifelink, Death Touch. And I could see that combo. Like, you could obviously use this card with a Death Touch or a Lifelink card, but the fact that some edge case combos exist is not reason enough to do this weird text splicing thing where a creature gains the ability to deal X damage. I don't get that. This is another miss for me. I mean, obviously the second part works fine. Creature gets +X/+X, where X is its power. That could have been fine by itself. Probably would have been an uncommon, could be rare. I don't like the first half of this card. It doesn't make sense. It feels clever. I don't like clever. Clever is not where you want your designs to be. Not very many of them anyways. You get 1 or 2 of those per set. Tidal Wave Shaper at rare, 3 WU. Creature, Merfolk Wizard, Spirit. It's a 3/1. Whenever Tidal Wave Shaper or its descendant attacks, create a token that's a copy of another target attacking creature and that's tapped and attacking. Oh, that's a mouthful. Let me read that again. So we've got a 5-mana 3/1, and whenever it attacks or its descendant, you create a token that's a copy of a different attacking creature. That token is tapped and attacking. Okay, and so like this is veering off in the direction that I was worried the previous card told me. This is veering off in the direction of granting an ability that doesn't care about the creature it's on, which is a little bit unfair. I mean, obviously you want to put that on a bigger creature, on an evasion creature, on a hexproof creature. Like, okay, sure, it does matter, but it's still kind of a weird thing to splice onto a creature. I was expecting it to create copies of itself, although that would be crazy weird, because that would just multiply. This doesn't feel like there's any place to go with this, obviously. And the other thing is, like, since the token doesn't go away at end of turn, it's just a normal token that could stay around. Like, that card just could exist. Like, take away the Descendant, just make this a card. Just this card without the Descendant would be a great card to print. And I may be different in this because I know R&D does this sometimes, but if you have a tweak that makes a really interesting card that's never been printed, let's not gunk it up with other text that you don't need. So like, I hate Dax duplicates so much, and I hate it because we could have had just a 2RU clone with haste. Full stop, cool card, and then they're like, oh, it also has Myriad. Why does frickin' thing have Myriad? It could have just been a haste clone and gone into Magic Remastered, but you had to bunk it up with this weird multiplayer mechanic. This is my personal opinion. I know it doesn't necessarily ring true. R&D prints trinket text and weird garbage on stuff all the time. I hate it. So that's just a me opinion. It's not actually a real opinion that is shared by the rest of R&D. This card, I don't get it. I would have much rather seen abilities that at least had some reason to care about the creature they're on, other than the creature just kind of being this weird carrier. The creature's a carrier of this disease, and the creature doesn't matter as long as the creature gets to live, and that's all you care about. One more card. Spirit of the Eternal Wood, Mythic Rare, 1 GG, Creature, Elemental Spirit, 3/3. When Spirit of the Eternal Wood's descendant dies, return a Spirit of the Eternal Wood from exile to the battlefield. Ancestry, 3 GG. Okay, so this went where I was wondering if we'd go. This is the sole card where Ancestry isn't just getting the buff that I was. And it's a cool card. I love the little story you're doing here, because now you're going to put Ancestry on something that you want to die. Maybe you can sack it. Maybe it's a chump blocker. Maybe it's got a sack ability. Make sure you do it when your opponent can't respond to it. And then it's now on the battlefield, and you got this 3/3 again. And then it dies, and you can do it again. And it's only a 3/3. It's a little small for a mythic, but that's okay. It does a very mythic feeling thing. It just never dies. It keeps coming back from exile, and I love that. That's really cool. I like this card a lot. The question is, does it justify being different from how Ancestry works for everything else? I think it does. I think it also tells me I'd probably want one or two other ones that were slightly different. And certainly if you're going to do these cards, you do them at Mythic Rare or Rare at best. You don't want limited to be full of cards where they work differently for all the different Ancestries. It's obviously a constructed card, but that's fine. That's what Mythic Rare is allowed to have. I'm a huge favor of this card. This is an interesting trip for Ancestry, because like the first few cards got me really excited that we had a nice clean mechanic that would keep doing the same thing, and then it kind of slowly went downhill with cards that strayed farther and farther away from what I'd want my Bestow cards and my Scavenge cards to do, because that's what this is. This is Bestow and Scavenge, just a new variation on that. Didn't see anything that played around in that space in a way that still made sense that you would enchant a creature with it. And then you had this Mythic Rare, which was really cool. So I think on the whole, this might be my favorite submission of a mechanic, and it's probably top 2 as an overall submission. I really think that this really showed like how hard it is to make a good mechanic and make a bunch of good cards with it and really craft an environment with that mechanic, especially when you're under the constraints of a test where you can't make support cards that don't have the mechanic. So what order would I put these in? I think I'd order them Ancestry, Rhythm, Backstab, Spilled Blood, Revered, Bloodied in terms of just mechanic. I'm ranking Spilled Blood kind of in a vacuum just based on this one card in terms of how I like the mechanic as a whole. Look at the next challenge. That's a good choice. Let's do that. Design Challenge 4. Work of Art. We did this challenge in GDS 1, but the art was so much worse. The art was all over the freaking place, and it was just weird things that are so hard to make into Magic. And I'm looking at this art, and I'm like, you guys have it easy. So let's look at this holistically. So you got a lot of creatures here. A couple of the creatures you could theme as spells or enchantments, auras. But in terms of actual spells, you've got this one here is maybe a spell, but it still looks kind of like a creature. This is a spell, and that's it. And you've got like one land artifact-y kind of thing, and one thing that could be an artifact, another thing. You got a couple artifacts, you've got creatures. You can do most card types here, but doing instants and sorceries is going to be freaking hard. This is a sorcery right here. There's not an instant. This is a sorcery. And like, where's your instant? That'd be the first thing I'd be doing, is trying to find an instant here. It's probably one of these up here. They're pretty generic and they don't have quite enough action going on. Maybe this could be an instant. Blue Mythic EDH enchantment? Holy crap. What would I use? A global enchantment? Maybe this? Maybe? So for an enchantment, I'd be looking for context. For example, I looked at this art to see if it looked like maybe the creature was overgrown compared to everything else. I could see this being a green enchantment for tracking, for example. This is probably the closest to an enchantment. That's hard though. I don't know how I'd make a blue enchantment out of these. That's really hard. Probably this or this, A or L. That's a different problem in the future. Thanks a lot. I'll see you guys around. See y'all.